Welcome. This is Uncommon Sense, a podcast presented by the Heshe CPA Knowledge Centre. The Centre is an initiative of the CPA Education Foundation, the charitable arm of the Chartered Professional Accountant profession in Alberta. Our weekly episodes feature conversations with Alberta CPAs, sharing their insights on a wide range of timely topics. Alberta CPAs work in every part of the economy and volunteer their time and expertise in virtually every community in Alberta. With each episode, we bring you voices and perspectives that reflect the diverse knowledge and contributions that CPAs bring to our province. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Uncommon Sense. I'm Jessica DeGroot with the CPA Education Foundation. In this episode, I'm in conversation with a CPA who is an incredibly active and resourceful community volunteer and a steward for natural areas. He is Frank Potter, a CPA in St. Albert with a passion for the outdoors, conservation, and protection of Alberta's natural resources. Frank has turned that passion into action through involvement in a number of projects focused on enhancing and promoting Alberta's beautiful outdoors. Frank's record of achievement in his career and his community led to him receiving the CPA profession's highest honor, fellowship, in 2025. I'm delighted Frank is here to talk with me about all of this and to walk us through some of the work he's doing as a voice for and a leader in the community. Welcome, Frank.
Thank you, Jessica. Great to be here.
Yeah, so to start things off, I'm curious, do you have a piece of uncommon sense to share with us?
How about a theme for today? And the theme for today is trust. And trust is a very precious commodity. If you're a fan of Stephen Covey's book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, you're probably familiar with his concept of a trust bank and how trust is deposited bit by bit and can be very quickly wiped out. That's really the theme for today. Is there's a lot of trust in society and society benefits from it, and we need to seek ways to increase the trust and increase that trust bank.
Yeah, absolutely. That's so true. And sometimes the banks, it can start off very small.
Yeah, exactly.
So first of all, congratulations on receiving your fellowship recognition from CPA Alberta earlier this year. What did it really feel like when you first learned that you were being honored this way by the profession?
A bit of a funny story in that I was driving. I was having a little trouble with my Bluetooth in the vehicle, and I got a call, and I was thinking, scammers are using CPA Alberta? That's really, really strange. It turned out it was Ruth McHugh, chair of the CPA, and after learning that the CRA wasn't going to come and arrest me, we had a great conversation. And I just want to thank my nominator and the people who wrote letters of support, and I'll try to uphold the trust that they have placed in me.
Yeah, and I learned this year in attending the Elevate Gala, and after sitting with one of the members of the nomination committee at the Elevate Gala, I learned what a process it is to nominate individuals for the awards within the profession. So it really is a great achievement.
Oh, well, thank you very much, Jessica.
And based on what I've heard, your long record of community-oriented service and leadership was a really big factor in you receiving this award. So before we dig into talking about that service, do you have any thoughts on where your interest in community service comes from? Did it come from your parents or other places in your life?
Sure. And growing up, I was very blessed to have a number of mentors, so scout leaders and people, church volunteers or school volunteers who really demonstrated the importance of volunteering. And I wish I could say it was all rainbows and unicorns, but I also saw those same people sometimes engage in very petty things and destroy or imperil the organizations that they cared a lot about. And so I was blessed with examples, but those examples were both positive and negative. And that's what I took away is how do you minimize the negative and augment the positive?
Mm-hmm. Sometimes we get just as many takeaways or learning opportunities from seeing the negative in compared to seeing the positives.
Exactly, yes.
So how did you really get involved, and why are you interested in helping to protect Alberta's natural areas?
So I grew up in Calgary, and one of the things you did was you went hiking in the mountains, an hour away. And so I grew up hiking, backpacking, paddling, basically getting out. That was what you did as a late teen or into your 20s. In 2000, I moved from Calgary to St. Albert. And initially I was thinking, oh man, the mountains are 4 hours away instead of 1 hour. But what I noticed was in and around the Edmonton area, there were dozens and dozens of little quarter section, half section natural areas that you could see on the map. And I kept my eye on them and visited a few of them and benefited it. In 2020, I both retired and had a COVID project, which is yeggville.ca. And that answers the question, where can you go within about 2 hours of Edmonton? So if you park your car in front of the Wayne Gretzky statue at Rogers Place and you drive no more than about 2 hours, where can you go? And I haven't finished my count, but I'm estimating there's about 1,000 places that you can go. And when I say go, what does that mean? It means self-propelled activity. So walking, hiking, snowshoeing, cross-country skiing, paddling, cycling, that type of thing. And that is an amazing amount of richness, that we have available to us. And when I went out in 2020, some of them were in great shape, and some of them, quite frankly, were abused. And this is kind of back to the theme of trust. If you have an area in which the ATV tracks are so deep, you can't even really walk, they have been overconsumed by the people who drove the ATVs. And once these areas are damaged, they're very, very costly to remediate. Nature will take its course, but that's hundreds of years. Or if you're like one area, I'm aware of Bilby, the government had to come in and actually do the remediation. I'm not sure how much it cost, but probably a fair amount of money. So ultimately, these are a shared resource. These are the commons. And they can enrich lives. They're these little postage stamp areas are areas where families can go out and learn about nature and become more nature literate. But at the same time, they can also be eroded, both literally and figuratively, very, very quickly. And so that's why I'm in this fight. It's probably a losing battle, but most good fights, the odds are against you, and we'll see how it turns out.
Yeah, I just think what a great resource for Edmontonians and Albertans in general. If you're in and around the Edmonton area, I know for myself, I have young kids and I don't know where to go with them other than like a city park, for example, or maybe some of the natural or national parks in the area. And sometimes you don't even know, you might see somewhere that looks cool, but you don't even know if you're allowed to be there.
All right. Actually, one of the things I'm trying to do with Yeggville is not only describe where you should go, but also talk about don't bother.
Right.
Don't go here. So one of the things I try to describe for each area is it kid-friendly? Are there washrooms? Can you park? Is it worth going? And I have a 5-point rating scale. And 1 is, meh, don't bother.
Yeah.
And 5 is absolutely. And so if you want to take your kids out and you want to know whether or not there's a washroom, that's what I'm trying to describe with the site.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So how can we best enjoy Alberta's natural settings?
So first of all, get out and enjoy the sights. You live in Calgary, you're definitely blessed, with the mountains an hour away. But even if you live elsewhere, like in the Edmonton area, there's lots of different areas that are around. And if you live in southern Alberta, you have Waterton and you have Cypress Hills. There's just a lot of places that we can go. But if you go with respect. If you have trash, take it out. If you're engaged in motorsports, go where motorsports are allowed, not where nobody else has gone. And sort of on that point, it's important that we remind politicians that these are important. And the Defend Alberta Parks campaign that happened a few years ago really was a groundswelling that demonstrated the importance to Albertans of these natural areas. And I think politicians got the message. But when someone comes and knocks on your door, make sure you remind them. I mean, there's lots of issues. Politicians are dealing with lots of different things. But make sure you remind them that it's not okay that these places be overconsumed by a few individuals. They are there for the community, and the community trusts that people will respect them. The other aspect is we have become, to a large extent, nature illiterate. We have moved away from a rural lifestyle. We have moved away from, when I was a kid, camping with my family, and getting out. We've become increasingly nature literate, and that's caused by a few different things. First of all, there is a sense that if you watched YouTube videos, you would be forgiven for being mistaken, that you can simply go out, take a couple of selfies, and go home. Well, nature is actually filled with a lot of biting, scratching, things that maybe even want to eat you. So if you're not nature literate, if you're not outdoor literate, start off with a nature club. Start off with a hiking club. Learn those skills. It's like anything else. You have to have those base skills before you go out. So know your limits. And to that end, also help your children learn those skills and learn that value. If you have a teenager and they are spending their days playing video games and you drag them out to nature, you're going to quickly discover nature is actually kind of boring. There's not a lot of stimulation, that happens out there. So you need to start young, and you need to build that literacy that goes with it.
Yeah, it's funny. I grew up in a very rural community, and in teaching my kids now, I have to kind of think like a beginner, as if okay, what are the common sense things that I've learned from growing up, on an acreage in a rural community that they really don't have a clue about as city kids. For example, we were picking some Saskatoon berries on some of the trails in our neighborhood the other day. So, we're picking a few and they're snacking on them. And then I felt the need to tell them, okay, so you can eat these berries, but make sure if you're going to touch another plant or another berry, you have to check with an adult, because my mind's just oh no, what if they think they can eat any of these berries now?
Yeah. Exactly, yeah. And I think a really good example of that is spatial understanding of your surroundings. If you grew up on an acreage, you probably had this sense of where you were at all times. So you were down by the creek. Well, you knew that the house was behind you and the barn was to your left and the neighbor was to your right. And with Google Maps and such, we've lost that spatial knowledge. So even something as simple as that makes it difficult. And if you walk into the bush and there are no landmarks and the cell phone service is spotty, you can very quickly become lost and disorientated. And you need to build that spatial awareness, and that's a skill just like anything else.
Yeah. So is that something that you would note on your site, is maybe if an area does it have a lot of signs? Is it easily to walk around and know where you are? Or are there paths and trails that you can follow so that you don't get lost in these areas? I
do. And actually, I have a couple different scales. And one is a trail scale, which basically says, if there's markings, if it's maintained and that type of stuff, it gets a higher rating versus it's a moose track. And good luck, because moose have a habit of going wherever the heck they want, whereas humans have a habit of going from point A to point B. So if you're not actually aware of that as a concept, you may think this moose track is going to go somewhere. It doesn't. The moose track goes to more bushes so the moose can eat. That's what the moose track's for. Now, obviously, it'll go to water,
a swamp or something. Probably.
Critters like to eat, procreate, and not get eaten. That's what they do for a living. They don't need a trail that goes from point A to point B to get to work.
Yeah, for sure. So I want to transition the conversation a little bit because you did mention that you were blessed with good volunteer leader role models. How can organizations get better at attracting and retaining volunteers?
It is a very, very tough question, and I don't think I have an answer, and I don't think a lot of people have an answer. And I want to actually talk about it at a couple different levels. I want to start off sort of at a larger social macro level, then go down to the organization, and then go down to the individual who is volunteering. So right now, Jessica, you're a few decades my junior. And in a way, I kind of feel sorry because, for example, the ratio of how much you need to earn versus how much you need to spend on your house is much greater than for me. Mm-hmm. And what does that mean? It means that both you and your husband, both parents probably need to work, just to simply live. And that takes hours away. And then sort of in addition to that, you have a lot more distractions. You have Netflix. You may decide on the weekend that you're going to binge on Friends versus working on a volunteer project that consumes hours. And screen time, Candy Crush seems like a lot more fun than a volunteer activity. And so there's a lot of consumption of time that is happening, and that's essentially the supply side. And then in addition, volunteer organizations are under increasing pressure. And it's a bit of a death by 1,000 cuts scenario. And I'm going to give you probably the biggest example, like it's kind of the poster child example of what nonprofits have to deal with, and that's a change in legislation in 2017. The Occupational Health and Safety Act was changed so that volunteers are deemed unpaid employees. And not a lot of organizations really sort of understand that. So what does it mean? Well, it means a nonprofit that has a volunteer needs to have a safety program and an internal responsibility system that goes with it. That's a lot of administration and a lot of structure that suddenly has been downloaded onto the nonprofit. And the people who are running those boards, number one, may or may not be aware of it. Number two is, well, what does it mean? And what does a safety program look like? And how much of a safety program do I need? Now, fortunately, probably they're okay. But on the other hand, if something egregious happens, your volunteers out there and they lob a leg off, with a chainsaw or something like that, and the insurance company comes along and says, okay, well, show us your safety program, and there's a blank stare. That may mean the insurance company says, well, you're kind of negligent because you didn't follow the minimum standards. Now, I don't want to necessarily scare people, but that's a great example of how society is putting a lot more demands on nonprofits. Sort of another example of that is the fact that governments are looking to volunteer organizations to download activities. You talk about the nonprofit sector or volunteer sector taking over former government programs. It seems like a great idea, except you have this shrinking pool of volunteers. You have greater demands on the smaller number of volunteers, and you have greater risk. Now, that's sort of at that macro level. Let's go down to the organizational level. With the organizations need to think about how they're paying their volunteers. What's the value proposition? And I don't want to get too mercenary in this, but you pay your volunteers. And people say, well, we don't pay our volunteers. Well, no, you don't pay them in cash, but you pay them in kind. And the in kind, there actually are three currencies you pay your volunteer with: purpose, affiliation, and experience. Purpose is the bigger picture. Why are you doing this? The affiliation are the social aspects. You're doing this because that's where your friends are. The experience is you're an accountant, you want to learn basket weaving, and so you joined a basket weaving society, to learn that. So those are the three currencies. Mm-hmm. And as a nonprofit, you also need to think about your volunteers from a life cycle perspective. Lots of different models that are out there. The model that I use is something called Lucky Sevens in Las Vega. Now, it's a kitschy name. The Las Vega actually refers to the life cycle. How do you learn about the opportunity? How do you socialize the volunteer? How do you manage them? How do you actually deal with a volunteer who has left? Are they dead to you, or they become part of the alumni? And that's an important question. And then how do you govern that? And then the Lucky Sevens is the actual cycle of a person. How do you actually get that volunteer standing on a street corner handing out Gatorade for a race, for example? And nonprofit boards need to think about these things and have transparent discussions of, are we paying our volunteers enough? And, what does our pipeline look like? Do we have enough people coming in for the 80-year-olds who are saying, you know what, I'm too old for this now, who are leaving? Mm-hmm. CPAs have an incredibly important role to play in that, and CPAs are process-orientated. And we already deal with things like risk. And so we can help on a nonprofit board asking those questions of, is our pipeline full? Or are we paying our volunteers enough? Or why are our volunteers not returning? Of course, this is not a one-size-fits-all scenario either, and boards need to tailor it as applicable. And then to the volunteer, sort of the bottom tier of that, it's okay to say, this isn't the experience I'm looking for. I want to do that. It's your hobby. It's not your job. And if it's not fulfilling your needs, move on to a different organization if necessary, or carve out a new experience. There's lots of opportunities to learn very, very different skills, in the volunteer community. And that's not to suggest that you don't take those roles seriously, but it is a way to try before you buy if you're trying to develop a new skill.
Mm-hmm. So, yeah, lots of interesting points there. Why do you think that it's important for people to give some of their time to volunteering, given the fact that, like you mentioned, you might have young kids, 2 working parents, you have to, everyone has to work to contribute to your lifestyle. I feel like we're just busier nowadays than, life is a bit faster paced. Although on the other hand, there is the time consuming activities that are not necessary, such as, increased TV time, social media scrolling. So how can you encourage individuals to get involved?
Well, first of all, humans are hardwired toward community and toward empathy. So we're, the fortunate thing is we are hardwired to be interested in doing things like volunteering. Because we want to contribute. We're interested in bigger picture stuff. And I think that one of the ways to bring people in is to look at that value proposition, to look at the 3 currencies, purpose, experience, and affiliation, and make sure from an organizational perspective, we're providing good experiences for those volunteers. And from the volunteer perspective, once again, this is your hobby, it's not your job. Make sure that what you're doing is what you want to be doing. And I think between that hard wiring and a good experience, that's how you can keep and sustain a good volunteer cadre. Unfortunately, there is no secret sauce. And volunteering fundamentally is a gift. And people can choose not to give, and for reasons that are well beyond the control of the organization. You just need to set up the circumstances as best you can.
Mm-hmm. I think, too, setting a positive example for our future generations. And you might not have all the time in the world to get out within your community and volunteer, but even if it's an hour a week or, something, you can start really small. I think the the value of giving that, having a role model in that way is huge. I hear that lots from our students who receive our scholarships, that when they experience receiving a scholarship, they feel just so much more motivated to give back in their future, whether it be monetarily or just, volunteering their time to their community and maybe mentoring or helping someone out in that way.
Yeah, and that kind of gets back to the theme of trust and creating these virtuous cycles. Or conversely, if people see that other people are not contributing, that can get into a vicious cycle. So it is important to mentor and model the behavior.
Mm-hmm. So looking more specifically at the accounting profession, what critical roles can CPAs play when it comes to volunteerism and community leadership?
So certainly CPAs have a very unique skill set, and they have a critical role to play on boards, in addition to handing out Gatorade on the street side, to the runners who are going by. But accountants are a high trust profession. They're one of the highest trust professions, actually. And so they're very, very welcomed on boards. And they also understand process, and they understand standards, and they understand repeatable systems. So process is year end. Standards, well, obviously the accounting standards or the audit standards, and repeatable systems, ERP systems, and the information, and that's a set of skills they can bring to a nonprofit. But once again, it's also a place, particularly if you're a younger CPA, where you can practice those skills, develop confidence and ability, and then take them back to your employer. Mm-hmm. And that is a virtual cycle that can be created, and it's a win-win. It's a win for the nonprofits, it's a win for your employer, and it's a win for yourself as well. Interesting enough, accountants also have a very interesting concept known as materiality. Is it big enough to worry about, essentially? Well, that's just enough. A way to think about materiality is just enough. So just enough project management, just enough board process, just enough systems. And that's something that they can bring in as well, which is we don't need to have a Ford Motor Corporation level of risk management for this little animal shelter. They can scale it down. So accountants have that sense of proportion, that can help with that. And once again, that's an opportunity to practice that sense of proportion in different environments. So really, it's a win-win-win. It's a win, once again, for the nonprofits. It's a win for the accountant, and it's a win for your current and your future job as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I love what you mentioned about, especially for younger CPAs, to get out there. Like you mentioned, one of the currencies of volunteering is experience. So if you want to gain more experience, you want to grow within your career, then getting out and volunteering to get some of that it's a really good opportunity.
Yeah, and ideally, part of those experiences is take on an experience that scares you a little. Mm-hmm. If you spend most of your time in an office doing audits, learn first aid and join a search and rescue, organization. Do something completely different.
Yeah.
And that's actually going to broaden your horizons and broaden your confidence and broaden your skill set. And you never know where it leads as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and speaking of doing something different, that kind of leads into our last question. Your community activities are so wide-ranging and diverse. Is there a common thread to be found with all of the various community activities that you've undertaken?
Well, I'm currently running primarily 3 websites. So I'm running sapastewards.com, which deals with the natural areas, and you're welcome to go visit it. And you'll find things like Wagner or River Lot 56, where you can take your kids, or the Sherwood Park Natural Area. Those are all in and around, and there's good details on that website about that. I've mentioned yeggville.ca, which is sort of a variation of the sapastewards.com, but it's more where do you go if you want to do things. And I get to do things on Yeggville that I don't get to do on Sapa, for example. Don't go to the snatch area because it's full of biting, scratching things, and there are no trails. Mm-hmm. I have a professional website, myorgbio.org, and that's actually where I put my professional thoughts and things that I want to remember to a large extent. And if I've learned one thing from that is I don't chase likes. For two of those sites, Yeggville and myorgbio.org, I consider them to have an audience of one, me. Mm-hmm. So if I'm happy with it, then it's a great website. And I don't chase the likes, but interesting enough, they still go up in the Google search profile because the content is king versus the flash in the pan internet sensation. Mm-hmm. And so if you don't chase likes, if you make sure that it's an audience of one or a very narrow audience, then that makes it a lot easier to sustain. There's lots of abandoned blog posts out there. And why are they abandoned? Because people say, well, I didn't get a lot of likes. Yeah. Well, don't worry about the likes. And actually, I would probably recommend to every CPA or every professional to actually start a blog. And think of it this way. It's a way to externalize memory. It's a way to write a book report, or to write a summary of a course, or to write a brilliant idea you have on how to better run risk management. And it can be very, very niche and very, very detailed. And you write it. And one of the advantages of actually writing it is it forces you to make it a better document, a better construct, versus just scribbling some notes in a notebook. Because it is out there, and people, there is this innate sense that you want people to have good respect for what you have written. So I really would actually encourage people to have a little blog. Don't worry about if nobody ever visits it.
Your mom will. If anyone, your parent or your best friend, somebody that will.
Yeah, no, sure.
Your spouse.
Yeah, maybe. But you will. And you know what? In 7 years, you'll go back and say, oh, wow, that was a great idea. Mm-hmm. Oh, you know what? My circumstances have changed. Now I can pursue that. Mm-hmm. Versus, shoot, where did I put that notebook?
Yeah.
The one thing I haven't quite figured out, just as an aside, is what is the trust economics of monetizing these websites? So at the moment, I don't monetize the websites, mm-hmm. and I don't have Google Ads on any of the sites. It has an audience of one. There's probably not a lot of ad revenue there, but. And that's a conundrum I haven't worked my way through, is how much do I want to monetize them, and how much of a devil's bargain is that?
Thank you for that, Frank. I think those are some really great comments, and I love the piece of advice about not chasing likes and just doing what you feel you should do, and as long as you're happy with it, then that's all it needs to be. So I want to thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me about all of the important work that you're doing. Your energy and passion are really evident in the way that you speak about your work, and it has been a real pleasure to hear and to hear about your insights. So thank you so much again, and keep doing what you're doing.
Well, thank you very much, and looking forward to the podcast. Big fan of the show.
Thanks. The Uncommon Sense podcast is presented by the CPA Education Foundation and funded by the Heshe CPA Knowledge Center. The Knowledge Center was created through a generous donation by the late Brian Heshe. Brian was a distinguished Albertan, business leader, CPA, educator, and community builder. His generosity and commitment to education underpinned his good works across Alberta throughout his lifetime. The opinions expressed on Uncommon Sense do not necessarily reflect the views of the CPA Education Foundation. We would like to acknowledge that CPA Education Foundation offices are situated on the traditional Treaty 6 and Treaty 7 territories and Métis Nation homeland. The Foundation acknowledges that we reside on traditional and ancestral territories of many Indigenous, First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples. Their histories and culture influence our community to this day. The Foundation is committed to helping build a province where Indigenous people and their voices and experiences are heard, valued, respected, and celebrated. Technical and recording services for this podcast provided by Wolf Willow Studios in Edmonton. If you enjoyed this podcast, please be sure to like, subscribe, and tell your friends about us. If you have any comments about the podcast, write to us at cpaef@cpaalberta.ca. To learn more about the CPA Education Foundation and the Heshi CPA Knowledge Centre, visit cpaalberta.ca/foundation.